Good morning, good evening, everyone. Team and SOAR fundamentals, and I explained everything with respect to architecture, with respect to different phases or stages of a SIEM and SOAR solution, the use cases, the industry use cases, as well as common scenarios in which we basically use SIEM and SOAR solutions. Also, the need in the modern security operations center, as well as its difference with endpoint detection and response, and how endpoint detection and response and SIEM and SOAR combine the capabilities and bring comprehensive security for an organization. That's what we discussed yesterday. Today, we will be starting with CrowdStrike Certified SIEM Engineer module. Now, as part of this module, we will be covering the syllabus. I'll quickly show what syllabus are we covering here. So this is the official guide for CrowdStrike Certified SIEM Engineer. As part of this guide, it basically comprises of 5 modules. The first module is, now if you want to understand the exam information that I will probably talk about at the end of this module. So we are combining SIEM plus SIEM Engineer plus SIEM Analyst. As I told you the other day, this used to be a single certification, which CrowdStrike kind of broken down into 2 separate certifications. And CrowdStrike did that in February this year. However, it was not visible, or it was not made available to everyone. I remember looking at this information or looking at this update in April this year only. So, but then it says February 2026. Okay, so what are we basically covering when it comes to SIEM engineer and when it comes to SIEM analyst? So when it comes to SIEM engineer, we are basically following on certain capabilities. The first capability is with user management, which basically means that as a CrowdStrike Falcon admin or CrowdStrike SIEM admin, NG SIEM admin, how do you grant appropriate level of access to NGC module to your employees, to your team members, to your SOC team members, which is level 1, level 2, level 3 analyst, as well as subject matter experts, as well as how do you bifurcate between engineering and operations. You will have certain individuals who are primarily there to design the configurations, write the query language, identify the security monitoring use cases, as well as being responsible for ingestion of various data sources to NGSIEM log scale log repositories so that the data or logs, or we can also call them asset information, risk information, or event from those data sources can then be either pulled or pushed into CrowdStrike Falcon log scale or CrowdStrike Falcon NGSIM. That's what we are going to talk about. That what are the native roles available, roles and permissions available, as well as if we can create a custom role. That's what we are covering in module first. Then we will talk about, or we will move into module second, which is data ingestion. If you remember from architecture yesterday, that when it comes to data ingestion, we have different data sources. So basically ingest data from these data sources into CrowdStrike. And these data sources could be endpoints, they could be your identity, they could be network devices, they could be applications, they could be cloud service providers as well. So we are focusing on data sources, which is data ingestion. So the module second basically talks about data ingestion from various data sources. That's what we are covering in module second. So what are we looking here? we are basically looking the differentiation between first party and third party data sources. CrowdStrike uses the terminology of first party and third party data sources. So I will explain what is the difference between first party and third party data source. Differentiate appropriate ingestion method for data integration. So when there are different data sources, you cannot treat them all with the same ingestion method. There are different ingestion methods available. We have direct ingestion method available. We have ingestion through a third party collector. We have ingestion through API. We have ingestion through syslog. There are different ingestion methods available if you remember from yesterday's presentation. Configure and manage built-in data connectors. Define common components of third-party data connectors. So built-in data connectors that are directly available out of the box, connectors which are developed by CrowdStrike or partner of CrowdStrike, and then third-party data connectors. This includes partner developed data connectors as well as custom data connectors that you can write from scratch. Or it also includes your generic data connectors. So if there are applications which for which there is no out of the box data connector available, we can basically use a generic data connector, which is also known as HACK, which is HTTP event collector. That's what it basically talks about. Or we can use collectors such as Scribble, which is another solution available in the market using which you can ingest data from applications for whom custom whom for whom default or partner developed data connectors are not available. Then we talk about identify necessary sizing requirements of a log collector. So if you are going with log collector arrangement, then how do you configure the log collector? What CPU, memory, and storage you select for log collector instance? All that we'll be talking about. Configuring and deploying Falcon log collector. After we identify the sizing requirements for log collector, we will configure and deploy it. We'll configure the fleet management. Basically, when you have multiple log collectors, how do you group them into a fleet, and then you apply configuration at the fleet level? That is what fleet management is all about. Monitor and troubleshoot ingestion issues. Definitely, when you have thousands of log or data sources available, when you ingest logs from those log sources or data sources, sometimes we come across a roadblock. Sometimes we face configuration issues. Sometimes we face ingestion issues. The configuration works smoothly. However, you do not see logs or events getting ingested from those data sources. So how do we monitor and troubleshoot is what we are looking at. Then comes parsing. If you remember, parsing is the third stage after you deploy collectors and forwarders, after you configure your log ingestion. Once log starts to stream into the solution, the logs are parsed. They are transformed into a standard format. They are enriched. Additional information is added to those logs. And then those logs are stored in the form of events, which are searchable events. So this parsing and normalization is what we are going to discuss in module third, wherein we will see what are the current parsing standards in use by CrowdStrike. How do we apply those parsing standards for data normalization so that we can enrich our logs, we can transform the logs into a common schema so that the security monitoring use cases can be created or queries can be written in advanced event search under investigate module in CrowdStrike. We'll look at various log formats which are there. We will also create parser test cases. So I will have certain use cases wherein we will create a parser from scratch and we will have log ingested from a custom log source using that custom parser. Clone and modify default parsers. So CrowdStrike provides you a library of parsers, which are known as out-of-the-box parsers or native parsers. We will also look at those parsers, and we can clone the existing parser and then modify the configuration and create a custom parser. We'll create an AI-generated parser. We'll also see how we can take advantage of shallow AI to create a parser from scratch with minimal or no efforts? Or by using natural language, how can you write a prompt to build a parser from scratch for a specific use case that does not support an inbuilt parser? Create an AI generated parser, apply advanced language feature for parsing, monitor and troubleshoot parsing errors. So our focus of this module is going to be on parser, leveraging what is already available versus what you can build from scratch and how CrowdStrike supports that journey. That's what we are doing in module 3. Then comes module 4. Now, after your logs are ingested, logs are normalized and parsed, your logs will be stored into log scale log repository in CrowdStrike. While these logs are stored, you can proceed with querying these logs. We can use log scale query language or CrowdStrike query language to write queries and search for specific actions, specific behaviors, specific events from those logs. So for that, we have module 4, or that is the next phase. If you remember from the architecture, after the logs are normalized and parsed, you basically perform correlation. Uh, you basically create security monitoring rules so that these rules can basically identify any correlation, they can identify any match in the events, in the logs, and they can generate alerts. They can generate incidents or detections while these logs are getting stored in different tiers. So that's the next phase, which is creating security monitoring use cases, or which is part of detection. So as part of this case, we basically create, as part of detection engineering, or as part of this case, we basically manage, create, and utilize lookup files. So I'll talk about what lookup files are, how do they help you in performing log enrichment to existing capabilities of CrowdStrike, or how you can complement by providing a custom information about logs that CrowdStrike would basically use while it basically generates detections. So the use case for lookup files: utilize built-in dashboards to monitor activity, design and build SQL queries. This is where we will learn how to write SQL from scratch. And CrowdStrike provides you a library of SQL queries. So how do you make use of existing SQL queries, and how do you optimize it, customize them based on your security monitoring use cases? How do you create custom dashboards? We will have out of the box dashboards available in CrowdStrike that basically provides us a lot of visibility about our SIEM and SOAR capability. However, if required, how do you create custom dashboards from those SQL queries? How do you create correlation rules? How do you perform, how do you manage and fine tune correlation rules and distinguish between first party and third party data detections or log detections? Since we have talked about first party data sources and third party data sources, we will see how easy is it for us to create security monitoring use cases for first party data sources versus third party data sources. That's what we are going to look into the module 4, which is more about creating detection or security monitoring use cases for various objectives that you have in mind. Then comes the last module, which is automation. So once these security monitoring use cases are created, once you have scheduled them, they will continue to query the logs at a certain point in time, or at the given schedule. And if there is a match, it will generate security detections. And when it generates security detections, those detections will be placed under unified detection module. So we have a common detection module, which is common for all the CrowdStrike modules, which means the detections from endpoint detection and response, detections from cloud module, detections from CSPM and identity threat detection and response module, detection from exposure management, detection from other modules of CrowdStrike. They all are combined into unified detection dashboard, wherein you can see detections from different sources. So we will look at detections. While we investigate those detections, there are times when you would want to perform certain activity. As I discussed yesterday, different use cases of automation. So if you want to perform those activities, and if those activities are repetitive in nature, your engineering team may want to automate those activities, which is related to network containing an endpoint, disabling an identity, or finding the additional information about a specific IP address, domain, or URL, also finding information about a specific executable. So if you want to put automation to that objective, then in the module 5, we will see what Falcon Fusion Sword workflows are. How do you create these workflows for automation? How do you create API access tokens, which it would require to integrate, communicate, and collaborate with third-party scenarios? How do you leverage API through Falcon, Falcon capabilities or Falcon Fusion Sword capabilities? That's what we are looking here in SIEM Engineer. So this is about SIEM Engineer certification or SIEM Engineer module, wherein we start with user management. We look at various data sources. How do you ingest data from those data and log sources? After the data is ingested, how do you normalize, parse, correlate, enrich the logs before they are stored into a log repository or data repository that is in use by CrowdStrike? Then different security monitoring use cases that you basically want to run your SIEM operations against. And in the end, how do you want to automate repetitive tasks, the different capabilities that you want to give to your SIEM analyst, so that rather depending on other team members to perform certain capability, they can leverage the existing automation. They can trigger that automation, and automation will take care of some critical actions that will ensure comprehensive security for your environment, rather waiting for other teams to get into action. That's what we are going to look into CrowdStrike SIEM Engineer. As I said, we will continue with SIEM analysts together. There will not be, so once we are done with this, we'll move on to the next module, which is SIEM analyst. And as part of that module, we will be covering the we'll be covering some modules. Give me a minute. Let me quickly show you what modules are we covering there. Okay, this is SIEM analyst, CrowdStrike certified SIEM analyst. As part of this, since this is SIEM analyst, this is analyst are operations team members, and they are basically investigating for alerts, for incidents, for deviations, for security monitoring use cases. So as part of SIEM analyst, they primarily focus on curing and analytics. So over here, we will learn how to construct SQL searches using various filters which are available, logical operators, as well as time parameters. We will leverage dashboards and pre-built scripts to hunt and analyze for suspicious behaviors, interpret query results to identify suspicious of malicious behaviors. So you are getting into the depth of querying and analysis. So you're using more CQL, CrowdStrike query language. You will look at various analytical reasoning to correlate between Falcon Next-Gen SIEM data sets, which is network, host, and email, and you will utilize CrowdStrike parsing standards to perform data sources agnostic queries. So in the SIEM engineer, we basically look at these capabilities at a very high level, or we basically identify the common security monitoring use cases, construct or take advantage of already available CQL and configure them. Here we get into the depth of it. Then there's a second module, which is detection logic and alert analysis. Over here, we basically look at various correlation rules between next-gen SIEM. We differentiate between first-party, third-party data connectors and how the detections are different from these data sources. We also, since this is more about investigation and triage, we basically look at MITRE attack alignment of various detections that are being generated by Falcon Next-Gen SIEM. We also differentiate between false positive from legitimate detections based on every context. So we understand how do you investigate, triage, and close a detection either as false positive or true positive, which is legitimate detection. We understand alert metadata, which is severity, tactic, confidence, and investigation priority. So this will reflect what we have already covered in the Falcon Responder module. So some of you were part of that module. So some information that I cover in this module will be a bit of repetitive nature, but from NGC perspective. There it goes from endpoint detection and response perspective. Then we look at incident investigation. Now this entire investigation is something which we have covered in investigate module, which we have covered in Falcon threat hunting and invest and threat response module, wherein we will basically pick up incidents. We will try to correlate the incidents from user, from asset perspective, from user perspective, from IP address domain or file hash perspective. We'll also look at related observations such as IP user and other indicators. So this is pure play uh, investigation, incident investigation, threat investigation, or detection investigation. That's what we are going to do here. Then in the end comes reporting and communication. So the entire reporting and dashboard module is covered here, where you basically manage the case management module. You basically create different types of reports, which are for variety of consumers, which are for technical consumers, probably your managers who are quite technical, as well as for non-technical consumers, such as executives, such as people who hardly log into CrowdStrike NGC or CrowdStrike Falcon module at all. However, they need to be informed on periodic basis about the status of incident response, about the status of how you are monitoring for security. So your executives, which is CIOs, CTOs, CEOs, so C-level executives, how do you create reports for them, schedule those reports, and also how do you create dashboards, create private dashboards or share dashboards with the rest of the team members, which is public dashboard. That's what we are basically looking here. So what I'm doing here, I will be combining both the modules together so that we follow the same use cases, the same different phases of SIEMs, which include CCSE as well as CCSA. That's what we are going to do, rather looking at these modules one after another. So that's the entire agenda that we are going to cover in next couple of weeks.